So you represent the 11th district, which is a huge chunk of the north side. Do you also have suburbs, or is it all in the city?
I have all Chicago. I'm a proud Chicago representative and resident.
Wonderful. Okay. So we're going to be talking today for our audience, the Protecting Household Privacy Act, or HB 2553. So why do citizens in Illinois need a bill that protects their household electronic data?
Well, as technology advances and we have more and more ways to access data, there are more and more opportunities for our data, personal private data, to be accessed, either by private companies or in some cases by law enforcement. So it's critical that the legislature put protections in place to ensure that as these new technologies are available, we ensure civil liberties protections for the utilization of the data that they collect.
So is this and this would be unusual in the criminal justice sphere, at least from my experience, is this preemptive, or is this something that this is law enforcement has already been getting access to this data and we're trying to stop something that's been ongoing?
Well, that's a really interesting question because we know that in order to go into someone's home and collect information or evidence, you need to have a warrant. And we know because of the laws that we passed over the years that in order to utilize someone's cell phone and search a cell phone for information, you need to also get a warrant. But when it comes to household devices like a Ring doorbell or an Alexa, for example, it's not clear. The law is not clear how law enforcement can access information, when they can access it, and what standard is utilized. So some law enforcement agencies probably do seek warrants, others do not. What we want to do is require a consistent standard in Illinois for law enforcement to use when trying to access data on those personal household devices.
So in this process is basically, I would say, just including these household devices and new digital devices as they come up, but they're basically including them in any way they would need to get information from me prior to this. Because if they were asking for public records of my or paper records, they would have. I think most people would say, no, you obviously have to get a warrant if you're going to come get them, or you can ask me, but I have the right to say no. Is that so? Basically, this isn't developing a whole new process. This is about adding household device data to an existing process that I think Americans take for that I think
Right.
American no worries. I think Americans take this for granted, right? And so this is just adding those devices to an already existing process.
Absolutely. It's our basic civil liberties protections against search and seizure without a warrant. And we're just applying it to a new device. And I'm confident that we'll be back in front of the General Assembly when some new technology develops and evolves to ask for these same protections.
Yeah, and I want to commend you on getting ahead of this, if that is what this is really, because typically when you see legislators, they're usually far behind the process. Um, and it's like cats out of the bag. It's like the cats and all their kittens, and all their kittens are out of the bag before they get to this. So I appreciate this. So let's, if we can dig a little deeper, what kind of data, what kind of devices are we thinking this legislation covers, and what kind of data is involved in those devices?
Well, we are defining a household electronic device as a device that is primarily intended for use within your household. So not your computer or your iPad or your cell phone, but something like a Ring doorbell, Alexa, a Google device, all those new devices that make it so interesting and fun to ask for a recipe or the weather just by yelling out the name of the device. I personally don't have them. Still a little bit wary of them in terms of the collection of data personally, but for those that have them and love using them, it's important to ensure there's protections and that the data, just like any other item in your home, cannot be accessed by law enforcement without going through the proper procedure.
So basically in Illinois, it was, at least we believe it was, to some degree a practice of some departments to access this data without needing to get a warrant.
Well, it's just not clear.
Okay.
And that's the problem. I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about getting ahead of an issue. Technology is advancing so quickly, it's almost impossible for the law to keep up. But what we're doing gradually over time is as technologies develop, we're finding ways to ensure that a a warrant needs to be obtained in order to get access for the data. And that's a basic civil liberties issue. Years ago, when drones were the thing, drones were everywhere. We were talking a lot about
Mhm.
drones. We passed a law, and I sponsored a law to provide that you needed a warrant to access information collected via a drone, because law enforcement agencies were be able to use the drones without protection. So what we need to do is continually update the law to ensure that your personal data is protected. And it's taken, I think, on a heightened importance based on the events of the past 4 or 5 years or so. I know that for the Latino community, this issue is particularly of concern because of issues related to the ICE agency. You see these agencies that can access data without any restrictions, and that's a real concern for people that are concerned about access without a warrant. And you see in some cases law enforcement agencies will push the limit in terms of civil liberties issues. So what we're doing is really focusing on protecting private personal data. That's what we did in the past. That's what we want to do in the future. You pointed out this doesn't really change our standard at all for access of private information and data. It just expands another method for obtaining that data.
Yeah, so here's my last question. I'm thrilled that these types of bills are being done. I'm spent many years, 25 sadly, working on the police accountability system in Chicago. And the events of late show just how well that's working, unfortunately. But I have switched to focusing on the system, to focusing on legislation and having legislators um, restrict and detail what powers the justice system can use, and the fact that I think that's incredibly important. So my last question for you is, or go ahead, go ahead.
I was going to say, this really is a check and balance on law enforcement. And we need to make sure it's very clear how and when law enforcement can access someone's personal private data. And that's important to all of us. Some people say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. You can have access to my data, but that's just not how it works. Collectively, we need to ensure that law enforcement acts responsibly within the confines of the constitutional prohibitions on illegal search and seizure. That's just a basic level as to how we should be operating.
Right, and I think good police officers, and there are many, welcome this because it clearly delineates the process that has to be done, and then they can go about doing their jobs within that process. The murkiness area is very bad for criminal justice system, because the agencies are going to push the limits to do what they think is right. Most of the time they're going to push the limits, and if you don't have a clear line of where those limits are, often people are going to go over the line, not realizing sometimes that they're even going over a line. But when the public finds out, they're like, oh my God, what are you doing? Having that clear line that the legislature sets is best for everyone, including good police. My last question for you is, who's opposing this bill, if anyone, down? You don't have necessarily name names, but is there strong opposition? What are they saying? What are their criticisms?
Well, thanks to the great work of the ACLU, we have neutralized most of the opposition we were getting from law enforcement. We found over the years that on all of these bills where we're trying to ensure constitutional civil liberties are protected, that law enforcement wants to make sure they can do their jobs, act fairly
Mhm.
and completely also. Obviously, if there's an emergency situation, if a kidnapping, abduction, or hostage situation is at stake and there's no time to get a warrant, we make exceptions in the law for these sorts of exigent circumstances. We do not want to tie the hands of law enforcement here. What we want to do is ensure the basic civil liberties protections, and we have been able to find a balance here. We do have some remaining opposition from some of the tech companies. And the tech companies basically, in my experience, oppose any attempt to restrict the collection and utilization of data. They also often tend to push back against us requiring them to let you know when they're collecting, sharing, and selling your data. So we have kind of a ongoing battle with big tech in terms of what's your personal private data and what they can access for their own purposes. So that's a little outside the scope of this bill, but it is a battle that I'd love to talk with you about in the future, because that is one that is an important battle that we are still fighting.
Yeah, well, keep fighting it. It's amazing. Um, it's amazing. I didn't think of big tech as being one of the opponents, but that makes sense. And as far as the policing, yes, I think these bills always have exigent circumstances, but they need to be forced to be able to articulate that, um, seek supervisor approval, and then those supervisors got to be on the line. Hey, you have to be able to articulate why you approve this, right? And so that there's got to be some oversight on that. And I know, looking at the omnibus criminal justice reforms that the Illinois General Assembly recently passed, which I'm elated about. Some of the police response, like I read some of the police vitriol coming from the Illinois Sheriff's Association and the Fraternal Order of Police here before I read what was actually in the bill, and I was like, wow, this seems like something I can't see the Illinois General Assembly going this far on things, and like making things like articulable. You got to articulate a reason why you do certain things, like turn off your body camera, or how you wrote a report that doesn't seem to reflect what's going on. Those to me seem only reasonable. Same thing with this bill. Like, yes, there's exigent circumstances, but you better be able to articulate the reason you did not use the formal process. And like you said, I think easily, there are some easy issues with kidnappings and other events where those are going to be very easy for law enforcement to be able to say, this is why we did it. And hopefully this bill restricts everything short of those few reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, when it comes to these requiring a warrant as technology advances, we've had good luck working with the Illinois State Police and the Illinois Sheriff's Association. They're, for the most part, I found to be very reasonable. They want to be able to do their jobs, but they understand that there is a line they don't want to cross. And so I found that they're very positive to work with, and they want to find that balance just like we do. So we'll keep pushing as new technologies develop, and who knows what they'll look like. We will continue to make sure that ordinary citizens' information is not accessed without a proper warrant. So I look forward to continuing this conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Representative Williams. Really appreciate it. Um, If you want to find out more information, you can go to our website, or you can go to the ACLU's website, aclu-il.org, and under their legislation, and it's PHPA for the end of that link. But you should find out about it. Can you just tell us really quickly, what's the status of the bill in the General Assembly?
Well, we just finished a negotiated amendment which removes the opposition of law enforcement. So that amendment, which will get the ball rolling, will be up, I think, in committee as soon as tomorrow. So I expect we'll see the bill moving very quickly at that point. And so if you're listening and interested in the issue, let your legislator know that you support protecting privacy and personal household devices, and that you'd like a yes vote on it. Appreciate your help.
All right, everyone, get activated. Okay, thank you again, Representative Williams. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.